So before we start, let's hear a word from our CEO, Mr. Jeff Thompson, and L'Oreal Jill, the VP of Research and Thought Leadership at IMA.
Marhaban Bakum at this special IMA event. Good morning. If we have earned anything from this past year and a half, it is that humanity is much more united and unifying than it gets credit for. That our needs are very much the same. And that even with the integration of automation, AI, and robotics, our world will always revolve around humans relating and connecting. And so long as that is the case, then it is the duty of corporations, the academic world, and the public sector to make sure that every single human is nurtured, supported, and given boundless opportunities to reach their full potential. This is seeing private and public sector entities around the world seeking to facilitate better business, social, environmental, and employment opportunities for all. The UAE and Expo 2020 uniting the world in one location is also a prime example of the vastness of human potential and of what is possible. Although great progress has been achieved so far, significant challenges remain ahead, with diversity, equity, and inclusion practices remaining relatively underdeveloped in some regions. The global finance and accounting profession is no different, and that has been a major focus for us at IMA over the years. Our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion practices started internally with a commitment to data-driven action. When we turned our intention inwards to make sure that our teams across continents felt seen, valued, and given ample opportunity to grow. Today, we are taking this message to the world by understanding where diversity, equity, and inclusion practices stand, identifying the pain point barriers standing in their way, raising awareness of them to seize opportunities, and letting the research and insights do the talking. While words matter, actions count even more. So we can drive the conversations needed to create change. This is not about public relations, philanthropy, or regulatory compliance. This is an invitation to truly unlock human potential and in turn catapult economic power to new heights, enabled by inspired, diverse, and inclusive talent. I would like to thank all of the partners who supported the regional survey. Your commitment and enthusiasm are fundamental towards creating actionable and lasting change to strengthen our profession, organizations, and society. Shukran, and thank you.
Marhaba. As a researcher who spent years using data to drive insight and change, I have become a firm believer in the power of research and in the power of this report we will be sharing with you today, one which will shed much needed light on the importance of creating and nurturing diverse, equitable, and inclusive cultures, not just in the finance function, but across all functions in the workplace. Because wherever there is human interaction, there ought to be fair treatment of all. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are not just terms for senior executives to throw around boardrooms. They are fundamental practices that ought to be part of every organization, with its custodians held accountable for its successful implementation and measurement. After hearing the stories of the people we interviewed in the Middle East, India, Europe, and the US, I can tell you the similarities are undeniable. And though tremendous strides have been made so far, much more change is needed and much more commitment from all those involved, be they the ones bearing the brunt of inequality, those enforcing it, or those who are unaware of it. My hope is that through our research, we are able to highlight the pain points and inspire leaders to address them, one company, one CEO, and one employee at a time, so that no matter where people come from or if they are people of determination, no matter what their ethnicity or gender is, they are given equal chances to prove their abilities from the most junior of positions and all the way to the top. Shukran.
So the theme of Expo this week, Expo 2020, is tolerance and inclusion. A topic very dear to my heart, and I was speaking to one of the panelists as well, Dr. Neda. She said it's very dear to her heart as well, being a female and a mother in the accounting and finance profession. So tolerance and inclusion are crucial requirements of every society and workplace. Today, we aim to highlight the progressive thinking that is required from organizations in order to truly have an inclusive and diverse environment and promote best practices. Because the long-term future of the accounting profession, and as a matter of fact, any profession, will be to be shaped by the ability of organizations to look inward and identify the gaps and opportunity that are required in order to have a successful DE&I transformation strategies. So let's start first by diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is any dimension that differentiates a person or a group of people from each other. It could be tangible, such as your physical appearance, or intangible, such as your culture, your faith, your belief system. Equity is the promotion of justice, fairness, and impartiality in processes and distribution of resources. And inclusion is the state of being welcomed, valued, and respected. Belonging is a step further, and it's the feeling of security and support that you have when you feel that you are able to bring your authentic self to work and being respected and heard for it. It's the feeling that you belong to something bigger than yourself and you are able to bring your authentic self to the workplace. And only when organizations can foster this culture of belonging would they really have achieved successful diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. So take a moment really to look at the illustration on the screen. The image on the screen illustrates the difference between equality and equity. Emphasis on equity takes into account the working assumptions that sometimes sameness of treatment, equality, does not result in proportional fairness, equity. Because no society is completely free from social imbalances, pay gaps between certain demographic groups, and representation or diversity gaps between the population and the profession and its leadership. It is therefore, equality could serve as an outcome of equity. Sustained and progressive equitable practices in the corporate setting should evolve over time into environment and culture in which equal access yields the same outcomes for all. Given the current presence of imbalances still in the workplace today, equity is necessary to achieve equality. And I think Liz Foslin and Molly West Duffy shared really the right metaphor. Diversity is having a seat at the table, inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. So the step beyond this metaphor, as presented, asserts that equity is ensuring persons of all backgrounds have fair access to the table. So before I share with you some highlights or a sneak peek of some of the research findings, let me give you a bit of a background. I'm sorry. Okay, so in February 2021, IMA, the Institute of Management Accountants, and CalCPA, the California Society of Certified Public Accountants, working collaboratively with research partners, contributors, and advisors, published the results of a research study on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the U.S. accounting profession. This study was the first of a multi-part global series. In July 2021, we decided to bring this research home to us, the Middle East and Africa and the MENA region. So we worked collaboratively with IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, as well as with research partners, and we launched the second phase of the global series, which included the study on D&I in the Middle East, North Africa accounting profession. And we focused on three areas: nationality, gender, and people of determination. This study included an online survey of more than 1,500 current and former MENA accounting professionals and interviewed with 15 accounting practitioners and academics. The report presents an assessment of the current state of D&I in the MENA accounting profession through key survey findings, oral histories of the study's participants, and an in-depth, discrete look at demographic focus areas in countries within the region. The role also examines the role of ethics in the profession's DE&I progress and suggests solutions to drive change as presented by the study recipients. Once close to women, the accounting profession in the Middle East and Africa region, including public accounting and management accounting. Management accountants are accountants and financial professionals working in organizations. Now boasts representation including female, a host of ethnicities and nationalities, and persons identifying as having disabilities, among others. In the face of diversity progress, however, many within the profession report rarely encountering women, and we talked about that, Nada, at the leadership role even today. In some countries, international talent often outnumbers local nationals in the accounting teams, particularly in leadership roles. In other countries, there is not enough qualified local talent available to meet the labor force demand. So we wanted to understand next what was contributing to the lack of diverse talent in leadership roles. When analyzing our survey responses, nearly 2/3 of respondents of all backgrounds viewed the profession as equitable and inclusive. But an even smaller proportion of women share this view. Less than half of female respondents believe women receive equitable treatment and have access to the same opportunity, information, support, and resources as male counterparts in the profession. When asked to identify the factors that contribute to underrepresentation of women in senior leadership roles, the majority of respondents from the focus demographic groups say they are not advancing because of inequity and exclusion. They point to first-hand observations or experience of inequitable practices and exclusive behaviors and cite instances of bias affecting recruitment, assignments, peer-to-peer interactions, promotions, compensation, mentoring and sponsorship, and retention effort. On average, female respondents report 7% lower annual income than male respondents, and I think we came a long way in reducing the pay gap here. Average annual income for respondents with disabilities or people of determination is 90% lower than respondents without disabilities. These disparities exist despite nearly equal percentage of male and female respondents reporting they hold at least one professional accounting certification. And female respondents have 36% more likely to hold a master's degree or a doctorate degree, and only 15% fewer respondents with disabilities reporting they hold at least one professional accounting certification when compared to non-disabled respondents. And nearly equal percentage of respondents with and without disabilities reporting 11 to 20 years and more than 20 years of experience. So beyond limited career advancement opportunities, female respondents and respondents with disabilities report that D&I issues have directly contributed to decisions of leaving a job and move to another opportunity while working in the profession. Our study found that 32% of female respondents have left a company due to a perceived lack of equitable treatment and due to a lack of inclusion. More notably, as many as 64% of respondents with disabilities or people of determination report leaving an employer due to a lack of D&I. You also see here the ratio of respondents from diverse backgrounds who identified a lack of D&I as a contributing factor to them leaving the profession. 1 in 4 for people of determination and 1 in 7 for female respondents. The opportunity cost to the profession and society is significant. These findings suggest that inequitable and exclusive practices have a direct effect on the retention and promotion of diverse talent within our profession. By decreasing human capital contribution to business, the lack of D&I affects turnover within an organization's accounting and finance function. It also affects the strength, stability, and long-term sustainability of the accounting profession's talent pipeline. At the time when retaining the best talent is more important than ever, we looked at the future to identify solutions. The Accountant International Independent Standards, the code by the International Ethics Standard Board for Accountants, IESBA, requires accountants to comply with 5 fundamental principles of ethics: integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. Among other attributes, ethical accountants act with integrity by being straightforward, honest, and fair in all professional and business relationships. They are objective and exercise professional or business judgment without being compromised by bias. And they should behave in a manner consistent with the profession's responsibility to act. Thank you so much. Although it's a challenge to put it on a sliding podium. Thank you. All right, thank you, Rabia. Rabia, by the way, is a team member at IME. So, and avoid any conduct that might discredit the accounting profession as a whole. Research has shown that when paired with equitable treatment, an organization with an inclusive work culture helps to ensure that individuals stay fully engaged and motivated towards strong performance and value delivery. It is important that leaders recognize that each employee has unique skills, talents, and experiences. Therefore, rather than check-the-box approach to human capital resources, it is beneficial to tailor processes that support, develop, and coach each employee in a way that allows for nurturing talent toward its best use. To this end, moved by a responsibility to act within integrity and objectivity, we see finance professionals as ready to champion the DE&I initiatives at their organizations. We know that significant efforts are underway in governments. We know the UAE government, the Saudi government are doing many efforts to improve female representation, gender equality, and representation of local nationals in the labor force, with targets as soon as 2030 to achieve marked improvement toward these goals. The accounting workforce will need to not only reflect the demographic makeup of the population of respective countries, but also of the future workforce. Identifying ways to attract diverse talent to the profession is vital. There is action we can all take now to advance the D&I within the profession. Given the current state of D&I, we shifted focus to the future. Most respondents told us D&I improvements is needed within the profession. When asked how to close the diversity gap among senior leaders, we received a host of ideas for new initiatives and reinforcing of existing initiatives. We arranged these initiatives in 4 key areas: raising awareness, attract diverse talent, drive career promotion, and increase accountability and for progress. Raising awareness to how to identify and mitigate unconscious bias was viewed as a key to recognizing and valuing talent of all backgrounds. Actively increasing exposure of youth to the profession, ensuring equal access to education, and presenting the profession as a desirable career path are critical to attracting diverse talent. Driving career promotion is about ensuring diverse talent has equitable opportunity to career advancement, not the misconception of promoting because of some demographic characteristics. And respondents also said, and no surprise here, most of them are accountants, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So increasing accountability for D&I progress, not just measuring diversity, but identifying ways to measure equity and inclusion was a common theme raised. And I'll be really interested to hear the views of our panelists on how to measure D&I initiatives. So beyond these 4 areas, participants in our study resoundingly said it will take a village to achieve the amount of change needed. Without expansive, targeted efforts across the entire accounting ecosystem, we, as a profession, risk being unable to attract and develop the human capital needed to meet transformational demand. So this study really calls for the profession's entire ecosystem: accounting leaders and practitioners, accounting associations, standard setters, regulators, college and universities, accounting academics, hiring personnel, and organizations employing accountants to act collectively, to acknowledge the impact of the current state of D&I on the talent pipeline and the transformation, prioritize establishing an end-to-end diverse talent pipeline, and leverage ethical principles to foster an unbiased, inclusive, and respectful culture, bringing in and promoting talented people based on relevant and unbiased factors rather than demographics present a valuable opportunity. IMA is also committed to action. We are developing collaborative efforts to develop metrics and best practices for D&I progress. We're also partnering with IFAC and many regional accounting associations to deliver the remainder of the global series of the D&I studies to understand the state of D&I in other jurisdictions. And we are collaborating to partner with others to implement solutions so they can have an even larger impact. To conclude, the profession lack of equity and inclusion can be interpreted by some as contrary to its ethical principles and values of unbiased decision-making and accountability. It can also lead to failure in enticing, developing, and engaging the requisite talent for the 21st century demands. I will leave the floor now to my colleague Ruba Zaidan and our esteemed panelists to share their views and experience on the state of D&I in their industries and ways to implement successful D&I initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Hannah. I'll introduce you to our amazing panel this morning. And it was really difficult to kind of recount their experience because they are collectively about 2-3 centuries worth of expertise. So today we have Dr. Nada Jamoul Moussaïkhe. She's the Associate Vice Provost for Research Administration and Financial Planning at New York University in Abu Dhabi. Her experience spans over 3 decades, including 16 years in academic leadership, with the likes of Abu Dhabi Education Council, Paris Sorbonne University, Abu Dhabi University, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young Middle East. She is a strong advocate of women empowerment, seeking throughout her career to support women in achieving their career aspirations while balancing the needs for a fulfilled personal life. She was recently selected as a mentor for the UN Women and NAMA initiatives in the UAE. And as a CPA, she's also an undergraduate and a postgraduate of the business administration from the Lebanese American University in Beirut, but she also has a doctorate from the University of Manchester. Nada's research interests include public sector governance and reform and organizational culture. Thank you for joining us today, Nada. Yes. We also have Mario Barili. Mario Barili is Accenture Middle East's Chief Financial Officer. He's responsible for the company's controlship, treasury, tax, financial reporting, and analysis in the region. He is a graduate in industrial engineering from Instituto Tecnológico de Buenos Aires, and he also has a master's degree in finance from Universidad de Tella. Prior to his appointment in the Middle East, and throughout his 15 years of career with Accenture, Mario has also served in a number of finance roles in several countries. In addition to that, he also successfully led a long-standing career of more than 25 years working with various industries, but also focused on communications and technology companies. Welcome, Mario. Thank you for joining us. Buongiorno. Wasim Karkabi also joins us today. He's the Global Head of Executive Assessment at Stanton Chase. He is a seasoned executive search and executive coaching expert with over a decade of experience across the leadership spectrum. Wasim has been successfully advising a variety of international and regional organizations on their strategic leadership direction. Is that the video coming through? Let's finish Wasim first. Since 1997. He advises clients on leadership, including acquiring, assessing, and growing their leaders to achieve the strategic goals of the business. He has an executive MBA from Halt International Business School and a Bachelor of Science in Marketing from the University of La Verne, California. He's also a certified psychometric cognitive assessment master, shall we say? Finally, and last but not least, we have with us Esther Ndishu. She's the VP of International Community Relations at UPS Foundation, based in Washington, D.C. A bit jet lagged, but I'm sure that it's going to be a good day today. She's been with UPS for more than 15 years, working in various roles, from air network planning, industrial engineering, revenue management, and customer solutions. As the first black female to run a UPS operation in Africa, she re-engineered the operation and had the most diverse business planning team in the operation's history. An advocate for diversity, her passion for working in the humanitarian sector was captured in a TED Talk titled "Hunger Isn't a Food Issue, It is a Logistics Issue." She was elected as the Executive VP of the American Business Council and received the 2018 Women in Business Award from the American Chamber of Commerce in Abu Dhabi. Esther completed her higher education in the US, attaining a bachelor's degree in international relations from the College of Worcester in Worcester, Ohio, and an MBA from the American International University in Atlanta. Thank you so much. I mean, you can see it's a very beautiful panel, and we're going to get to, yes, thank you. Hands up for you. First of all, when we look at women and people of determination, because in the UAE we refer to people with disabilities as people of determination. It's an empowering term, and we shall be using it for the remainder of this session. So when we look at them, they leave employers and the profession because of diversity, equity, and inclusion-related issues. We'll also refer to that as DEI. Our study found that 33% of female respondents have left their company due to a perceived lack of equitable treatment and due to lack of inclusion. More notably, as many as 64% of respondents with disability report leaving an employer due to the lack of DEI. This is causing the finance and accounting profession, amongst many others, because as Hanadi noted, it's not just isolated within the finance function, to lose talent. What are some of the talent retention strategies that you can think of or that you've seen as best practices that you can share with us this morning? Nada.
Thank you, Ruba.
No. You have to activate your microphones, by the way. I will come around.
Thank you, Ruba.
Press and hold until it's green.
It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning. And I would start by saying, I think like the core of the issue is the mismatch between, all what we see in terms of companies want to promote diversity and inclusion and what happens on the ground. So we have all the slogans and we have like the corporate videos, we have like the training, but then on the ground we see the practices, although they have evolved, but we're still far behind in terms of creating a culture that really promotes diversity and inclusion, that gives equal opportunity to people of any race, color, gender, people of determination. They're still like deeply rooted inequities, I would say, particularly in HR practices around, and I think we'll talk more about it, around recruitment, retention, and advancement. And I think as long as the gap exists, we will still continue to see that. Some of the practices that companies can use is take action. And I can say about my own experience at NYU Abu Dhabi, so we identified this as an issue. Students were complaining, faculty were complaining. So we had all this training, but then it was not enough. So what we did is we had an action plan, like an action framework, and this is published, and it's public for everyone, including the student. They can see what we have identified as action items. There are 11, and the progress is tracked on each one of those 11 initiatives and is shared with the community on quarterly basis.
So it is being measured.
It is being measured. That's the trick.
Measured?
Yeah.
Doesn't get done. Thank you.
Thank
Nada.
you.
Wasim, please tell us your view on this.
I think there's a bit of you called it mismatch. I'm calling it lack of alignment, perhaps, between the programs that are being put and what is needed, right? So there's some activities and or some strategic directions that some people, we don't know who, at this very senior level of an organization that are setting some standards as to what we should be doing. But that is a mismatch with perhaps what diversity requires, what gender diversity in specific requires. In organizational culture and or in general management practice, if you want to look at management practice, that has all been created in the West. And as we try to make it travel to the rest of the world, it doesn't necessarily resonate because it is just trying to communicate something that is not relevant to other markets sometimes. And this is the same kind of an example because we're trying to translate some elements as we understand them at a senior level of an organization, at the board, at the executive committee, and so on and so forth. But it really, we're not sitting down and asking the people that are concerned what we actually should be doing in order for us to achieve the result that we need to achieve, and hence that mismatch in the numbers. Some people say, organizations say that we are actually doing what we need to be doing, but women and or people that are concerned in this topic are saying, no, we're not getting what we're supposed to be getting. And hence you're seeing this mismatch that's happening in the world. So I think at the top level of the organization, you first need to inject more female candidates there. I was having a very quick example. I was having a call with one of our clients who wants to hire a couple of board members for one of their companies in Saudi. And I said, there's a slide in our presentation at some point that says, there's a diversity slide and says, we'd be happy that this role could be a diversity hire. Is that something that you would consider? And a lot of times, I feel that we put clients in an awkward position to answer such a question because they haven't considered it to begin with. What does that mean for them? How does that play out? And unless we start by putting women on boards and women at the very senior level of the organization, then this is not going to trickle down to the rest of the organization correctly.
Thank you, Osi. I mean, when we moved to Esther was one of the first African-American females to actually get a leadership role within that region. So what can you tell us about, A, the best practices that you've seen, but also, Wasim mentioned the fact that there was no listening on the ground. You achieved great results in your regions. How did you do that, and what were some of the best practices that you used?
Thank you. So you took a few words out of what I was going to say, but I'll just feed on to that. So having the leadership reflect what you want, the direction you want to go. So, for instance, for us at UPS today, in our first in history, we've never had a female CEO in 114 years. Last year, we appointed our first female CEO. For the first time in history, our board of directors has 48% female representation, which is phenomenal. And what does that mean? That the decisions that are being made in the strategic direction of the organization are aligned with the folks that are sitting on the leadership table. And it trickles down to the different functions within the organization. So yes, I did have the pleasure of leading an operation out of South Africa. So I was head of our East and Southern African operations. I had 21 countries, but based out of South Africa. And it was an interesting experience because I think when they appointed me, they thought, well, she looks like the folks that are in the country. I'm of Kenyan origin, so she's African, and she should be able to make things work and bring lots of changes, right? What we didn't take into consideration is a history of South Africa with apartheid and the fact that I was coming, whilst I might have been with the organization for a long time, we're a very male-dominated industry. So lots of challenges trying to crack into that. When you have your business meetings, I had to always make sure I had a counterpart with me. In some cases, I'd been advised, make sure the person you take looks like the person you're meeting. So you can read that into however you want to read into it. I found a way to make it work to my advantage. But then above and beyond that, it was also ensuring that my organization and the team that I had reflected the country. So I took over an operation that was predominantly white because it was led by a white male, and he believed that the other folks within the country could not necessarily have a seat around the table and make the right decisions, which was very wrong. So when I came in, the first thing I did was I had a strategy. I needed to make sure that we had enough women sitting around the table. We had enough from a racial perspective. We were recruiting the right people. So regardless of whether they'd been in the industry or not, I brought in people from outside of the industry, because that also just changes your, the thought process. And I'm proud to say, I mean, successful results from an empowerment perspective. I had young women coming to me and saying, I never thought I could have an opportunity to actually lead an operation. Now, going back to the stats and how you calculate and make sure that you're actually you're able to track what you're doing. As an organization, we have a metrics that actually sits on our international balance scorecard. So under HR, there's a diversity element, and the diversity element looks at the racial mix, right? The racial gender mix. But the next level down is women in operations. So being a very male-dominated organization, we noticed that we did not have enough women in management. So that's an area that we're tracking and we're measured on. Every country, every region is measured on how many women they have in operations. And that also ensures that we retain the talent, because I think that's the other part that you mentioned is the retention. It's okay for you to recruit and it's okay for you to say that your numbers look great, but what are you doing to ensure you keep them? And that goes into, we talked about the pay and making sure that you've got the right HR policies in place to accommodate them. Not that we're special, but we do have different needs, and ensuring that all that is in, and it trickles down to every level of the organization. So from senior leadership all the way down to our operators.
Great examples there, thank you. Mario, when we were talking earlier before we started, you mentioned that you get frustrated that this is even a topic. Women should be, and other genders and this and everything with people of determination should be equal.
Absolutely.
Tell me more about that.
Absolutely. So first, I must say, you all said, you just shortened whatever I was going to say by
That's what happens when you sit at the end of the panel.
But I mean, I was reading the statistics, I kind of felt a bit frustrated with the number in terms of the people that see the profession as equitable. Because quite frankly, in finance we deal with the only thing that has no bias whatsoever, and that's information. That's all. So I was a bit, honestly, a bit frustrated by that statistic. Sorry for the personal note on that. But then, you all said something that to me it's also very relevant in terms of how we do things on a day-to-day. So Accenture, as you probably know, we have a female CEO, a female CFO. This is, in my long tenure at Accenture, the second time we have a female CFO. Our CHRO is a female too. And we have very strong diversity, equality, and inclusion policies around it. And that goes back to the point that Wasim was making about this needs to be embedded at the top part of the company. It's something that needs to be driven by the top leadership of the company, and then goes to the practicalities, the day-to-day practicalities that you see on the ground. And here is where probably that disconnect happens, or what I've seen happening over the years.
The mismatch that they
Exactly.
were speaking of earlier, yes.
And it all comes down to its people. And it's the experience that people have in the companies. And this is where those policies need to translate into the day-to-day action, in which the people that are dealing with the teams on a day-to-day need to leave that diversity and inclusiveness across the board, supported by a framework. And back to the best practices. So when you talk about disabilities, now we are in a world in which we have access to technology that allows people with people of determination that have now the chance to work seamlessly in their workplaces or wherever they're working from, in which transparency in terms of the career path, in terms of compensation, in which how things are dealt within a company become more and more relevant. So in the end, that disconnect needs to be solved, needs to start at the top, but it also needs to be worked on the ground with those that live the day-to-day, what I call the trenches in finance.
Thank you, Mario. I skipped one of the questions because you covered it already. We're going to talk about the findings related to women in the workplace and then being given opportunities, but I think we've heard some good examples on level. I want to talk to you about the reference that we do to diversity, equity, inclusion is considered a soft component of the business. So when we reference it as such, research upon research has told us otherwise. I mean, when we look at it from a profitability standpoint, as a numbers game, gender diverse workforces are actually, or workplaces are always much more profitable. So let's get some quotes in there. McKinsey Global Institute, a study that they did on gender diverse organizations, found that there's a 15% higher chance of gaining above average profitability than it is in non-gender equal counterparts. Another study found diverse workforces experience 35% increase in performance over non-diverse companies. A Boston consulting group found that such companies generate 19 times more revenue than non-diverse teams. And yet we still consider this a soft element. Do you think that there's an educational problem here? Is it, what do we need to do to put this as not a soft element, but actually one that will affect productivity and performance and the bottom line for companies? Nada.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it has to be embedded in the DNA. I mean, that's the short answer. It can't be just like a talk. It can't be even just a measure that will be published on corporate media. It has to be deeply embedded in what organizations believe. And people have to see that on day-to-day basis. I mean, I can talk a little bit. For the past maybe 17 years, I have been working in higher education, not for profit, so the profit element was not there, but I can talk about like the productivity element that was clear when you promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I was fortunate to work in government agency where I was given opportunity to hire women, and at one point I had 99% female department.
Brilliant.
It was 30 female in the accounting department. And I had to deal with the reverse diversity because, people from HR was like, oh, you're not hiring males, so you need to do something about it. But I can tell you, the productivity that you get from having that diversity and the role model. I think having, Esther, you talked about when they look at a female making it, and a mother, and someone who, you don't have to give up your motherhood, you don't have to give up your life for being successful. You can still do both. And the way you treat other, the flexibility you engrave, and you don't have to change all the HR policies to do that. It's just what you do every day, and the small acts of, I have to say, act of kindness, act of empathy that you show, and they go a long, long way. And, I'm really, really proud to say when I'm still in contact with most of the female I worked with, and the male, of course, but I'm really proud of what they have achieved. And most of them have made it 10 years down the road. There are CFOs, there are executive director, they are in really high position in government and non-government agency. And they still I had the chance to talk to one of them maybe 2 weeks back, and she said you don't understand how much you gave me power when you gave me the opportunity. She wanted to do her master's, but the HR policies were not flexible for leaving early or taking a leave of absence when you have exams. And I had to fight with HR for her to get that. And she made it, and she's an executive director in one of the biggest project in Abu Dhabi. And you know what? The real power is that in turn, she does the same for her team. So because she was given that opportunity, that real opportunity to show her potential without bias, When in turn she's leading a big team, she will do the same for all the people working with her.
Because you showed her what's possible.
Yeah.
She saw what's possible. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nada. Wasim, earlier we were also talking about, like the recruitment process as well when it comes to headhunting and how that works. Do companies that you've consulted for many companies in various industries, do they realize that when they're in the recruitment process, this has a direct impact on their bottom line, how diverse that spectrum is, and how have you seen them deal with this approach? I mean, do they see it as soft, or do they really consider it as an important kind of consideration before hire?
Here in this part of the world?
Yes.
No. The plain answer is they don't see either, right? So you have to talk them through it. You have to show them the actual reality behind the numbers. My opinion is that an organization or a team or a department or a division is not complete unless it has both sides, all kinds, right? So if you look at how you structure teams, you try to look at personality profiles. If you put all drivers in the same team, then who's going to follow, right? If you put all people-oriented people, who's going to do the numbers? If you put all number crunchers, who's going to deal with the people? This is how you structure teams, is by ensuring that you have diversity of personality within a team so that everybody has the appetite to cover a whole brain, to have a whole brain in the room. Unfortunately, any team that doesn't have a woman on it doesn't have a full brain in the room. So unless that happens, and this is why those numbers are coming out this way, is because the brain is becoming more complete. The brain of that organization is becoming more complete. There is a perspective that is not seen at all if there is no woman in the room, if there is no woman on that table. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Especially from a female perspective. Esther, please tell us more about that female perspective from your view.
I am so going to be using that from now on. The brain is not complete without a woman. So I think you have to be very deliberate and intentional. Somebody has to start that conversation around the table, whether it's your HR or whether it's one of the female leaders that has an opportunity to be in the team or as part of that decision-making process. You have to be very intentional about it and make people uncomfortable, because sometimes people get uncomfortable about it. Sometimes folks don't want to hear that you've got 10 men and 1 woman, and that does not look right. There's something wrong with that picture. Or you've got 10 men of the same race, same age group, and you guys are wondering why you're stagnant and you're not moving forward. Somebody has to be able to start that conversation. So finding that champion within the organization is important. And I just think about, for us as an organization, this year we elevated the role of our chief DI officer to a C-level position. So she now reports to our CEO. And she's looking at our organization top to bottom. So it's the next level of leadership. What are we doing? What are our policies? What are our pay structures looking like? We've got an equity and justice and action task force that has been set up, made up of different leaders within the organization that look at our different practices from a pay perspective, gender, race, and disability as well. And that is intentional and very deliberate. And if you don't do that, then everything else gets lost. If you've got a person that is not championing it within the organization, then it won't get done. I don't think it will get done.
Makes absolute sense. And Mario, if we thought you're a finance person, you've been in finance and you've been with the same company for 15 years, and now you said that in the C-level you've got 3 to 4 females. First of all, isn't it daunting to be the male in the house now with them? But also, have you seen a difference over the years? You've been with them 15 years. Did you find that kind of female inclusive, empowering atmosphere has impacted the numbers? And do you think that it's important to look at it from that standpoint?
I mean, I'm probably going to reflect on 2 things. So Accenture, since we work, the frontier of technology, right? This is what we do. And change is directly intertwined with diversity. That's a fact. So we have been a very diverse company at least even before I joined. Now, when we go into the results, quite frankly, we have been accelerating our growth ever since Julie stepped in as our CEO. Public results came out about a month and a half ago, and they were staggering. So definitely there is a correlation that we can see in the day-to-day about that, but most importantly in how we deal with our clients. Because clients want that, or our clients want level of creativity that can only be the result of a culture that fosters diversity, that embraces those different points of view. And this is something that we see on a day-to-day. You can only adapt to change rapidly, especially in a rapidly changing world like this one, with technology moving at an incredible pace. You cannot do that with what Wasim was saying, the same type of profile. You definitely need that level of diversity at all levels to embrace it and rapidly move to the next level. Otherwise, your results, your financial results will be impacted in the very short term.
No, I think that there's a lot of reason to that, especially you talk about the diversity of views. It's not just females versus males, it's just the diversity of thought within one room. Ray Dalio, by the way, has a TED Talk about the DOT system that he uses in his company. It's one thing to watch, by the way, how they take everyone's perspective within the room and they create a percentage to who to listen to. Very diverse. Did you want to say something?
Sorry, I wanted to add one more thing when you talked about productivity. So when I was in my role in South Africa, I used to get criticized by my leadership team for being too soft and too nice. Right? Where you're worried about people, you keep calling us and you're talking about the issues you're having. Your discussions tend to be 40% people and not necessarily 70 or 80% about business. So I'm like, but the people make up the business. Absolutely. So if my business is not if the folks that are supposed to be running my operation aren't happy and are not able to come to work and be productive, then we have a problem. So fast forward, I mean, we went through a lot of challenges just trying to clean up the operation and trying to get us to where we needed to be. And so I moved from my role in June of this year. And 3 quarters in a row, best results ever. So whilst it might have taken us a while, and whilst it might not have been the way they'd have wanted us to go through it, to get to that point, I remember I had to make my first business plan review for the beginning of the year, and they came back and told me, well, we don't think you're being aggressive enough, and we want you to come back with another growth strategy, and we're increasing your plan by X. So I said, okay, sure. Really? Yeah. I think we can do it. My team's looking at me, like, are you crazy? How can you commit this number for us? No, I think we can do it. And sure enough, I mean, for the first time in history, we've been above plan on everything, from profit to revenue, every quarter, going back from when the organization or when the operation started in the country 25 years ago. So the soft stuff that I was being told was not necessarily important for running the business is actually paying off. We've got people working from home, and they're able to collect, money from our debtors. We've got folks that are excited to be coming into work because they've been promoted in roles that they didn't think that they would ever be able to have. That soft part of it, and being conscious of it and making decisions about it for the business is important, and it does lead to that productivity that you're looking for.
I think also in your case, you let the numbers do the talking. So you don't believe me how soft powerful can be? Yeah. How do you like them numbers? Beautiful. Thank you for that example. So at IMA, for example, we value diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, this is a project that we took on just to externalize the process that we follow internally. We also have a dedicated director of DEI. And their core focus is really looking at driving such practices internally. But not everyone has the privilege of, not every company has a DEI director or even that function for that matter. So what can leaders do in the interim to encourage DEI culture, nurture it internally, so that on the long haul, they could become more DEI? And who supposedly takes ownership of this? I mean, Esther, you mentioned that it was an HR function role. Nada, you also referenced it back to HR. But is it a C-level thing? Because we also talked about trickling down. So who takes over this? Who's accountable for this, and who's measuring? So if you can tell us your view on this.
I think definitely has to start at the top, that's for sure. But as I said earlier, I mean, it has to be embedded in the DNA of the companies and the organization. The culture has to reflect, I think Wasim talked about, like, you know, when you take a concept and try to implement it here. And we are in a very, you know, I think, a place where we have a mosaic of culture. And I did my research on organizational culture in the healthcare, and one of the interesting finding was the impact of national culture. So although we talk about like organizational culture, then each nationality comes with its own a culture, and you need to recognize this in the workplace. You need to recognize that mosaic and work around that mosaic so that you can create the inclusive culture we're talking about. People need to feel empowered and feel that their voices are heard all the way. I mean, again, like I gave in our example, like the student, actually the student were the first to really raise their voice about this not being as inclusive as we pretend to be, or as the slogan pretend to be. And then we had them sitting on the table. So this implementation committee, it had student representative, faculty, staff, everyone was sitting on the table, and they were brainstorming about, you know, what does it mean to be truly inclusive? What does it mean to be truly equitable? And then it has to translate. I mean, I keep going back to the HR policy because we hit the wall there. I mean, I personally see that. Like, so we talk, we do everything. Then we go and tell HR, oh, now you have to have like a flexible policy around, I don't know, like maternity leave or working from home. I mean, the COVID had like great example of what can still be achieved by having the flexibility, people working from home or working, you know, everywhere, and still, you know, people, most of them do not take advantage. In fact, they work even harder when you give them, you know, the opportunity to be themselves and to show the best that they can do. So having those translated and having the transparency, you know, it has to be really transparent. You have to show, even when results are not showing great, and, you know, even when progress is, you know, we had metrics where progress was not going up, it was going down. We were declining. It's good to show that and to be upfront and transparent about it and collectively find solution.
Thank you. Wasim, Nada referenced mosaic. She said that, you know, that diversity is created as a mosaic. Who's the artist in the company who's going to curate that mosaic and make sure that it's actually evenly spread? Because you mentioned before we started examples where it went wrong in attempts to diversify. So as much as you can share on that one would be great.
So look, it cannot be owned. I know I've seen the trend now. You can see that every chief HR officer is now called chief people and culture officer. So that has been changing tremendously around the world. And that really is a message from organizations who are very adamant about DE&I, that we want to put culture on the table. It's important to us. Stanton Chase has a global partnership with a company which is called Hofstede Insights. Hofstede Insights is the #1 organization when it comes to measuring and transforming organizational culture. And I can tell you this for sure. If you give this task to HR, it will remain on the service road. It's not going to go on the highway, right? And that's the problem. The problem is that we make initiatives rather than embedding it inside the culture. Even when we're trying to transform culture, we're working with a variety of different organizations, family groups, Abu Dhabi, government entities, as well here and in Saudi. And the result is always this: oh, you're a consulting firm, you should come in and change our culture. No, it's got to change from within. I cannot change it for you. We will show you what to do, how to do it, advise you, but you guys have to do it from within the organization, and you cannot own it in HR. It has to permeate across. One of the first things that we do is we create a culture squad with leadership. And in that culture squad, you have people from the top to the bottom and across all different functions. That way, you start to infest or infect organizations with a new whatever virus you want to infect it, because you've got enough of these people around, these ambassadors in the organizations that are changing things, that are making changes at the practical practices level of how we go about doing our work, not just lip service and posters on the wall. So the problem is if you want to resolve this, if you want to move it towards that direction, first you have to measure whether you have the organizational culture that is open to DE&I. If you don't have that organizational culture, then you need to figure out, what do I need to change so that I am open and ready to accept and implement DE&I in my organization. Otherwise, it's going to be lip service for a very long time, and it's going to be hard work. So culture change is number one, because that puts you at a readiness stage where DE&I becomes going fast on a highway rather than on a service road.
Esther, you come from a very strong, diverse culture. So what are some of the best practices that you can share with us? You already have a system and you already have custodians of diversity. So how can others emulate that?
So I think we went through the evolution. So it sat within HR, then it moved from HR to the foundation, which I'll talk about the foundation a bit. But then it went, and then we decided as an organization it needed to be a standalone function for the reasons Hussein just explained. And very important for us, because it's not only just a conversation about UPS, it's about UPS's customers and our suppliers. So when it's a standalone function, Charlene can go in and have a conversation with our customers about their diversity and what their plans are and what we are doing as an organization. Under Charlene as well, we've got supplier development, where we go out and make sure that we've got a diverse group of vendors that we work with. And there's a whole ecosystem around that. So financing, which functions do we want to make sure, or which areas within procurement are underrepresented? Do we have underrepresentation of female business owners? And then it trickles down to other groups within when you look at diversity. From a foundation perspective, we are also looking at, we think we've got a diverse board. So our board is made up of our C-suite members of our leadership team, which also has, I think the numbers are about 40% female, which is pretty good for a logistics company. And with that, we're looking at the organizations that we give money to. What does your board membership look like? How diverse is it? I have the responsibility of leading one of the focus areas, in addition to my regular responsibilities, which is the equity and economic empowerment focus area for the foundation, where we look at organizations that are looking to make systemic changes in the advancement of women and the youth. What organizations or what target populations are they looking at? What does their leadership look like? And is their leadership resonating with what we call or what we consider as a diverse leadership group as well? And we have those conversations openly. We're concerned that you do not have any women in your board, yet your focus area is around women. Or you have one woman out of 8, and your focus area is youth. How are you going to talk about the girl child if your focus area is youth and you have one woman in the decision-making process? So I think being deliberate about having those conversations and then looking at the partners, both internal and external partners as well.
Excellent. Mario, it's important to also refer back to the finance and accounting function. And we know that it's a very male-dominant arena, finance. How do you see that happening, and creating a diverse culture within the finance and accounting function? If you can tell me more about and how you're seeing that happen from your end. And also, sorry, who's the custodian? Do you lead it as the CFO, or is it also resting within HR, or is it seeded across the organization?
So I'm going to start with that one,
okay.
Because that's probably the easiest. No, that definitely lays with me and my leadership line, the one that directly reports to me. So here is an interesting point in which, and I agree with all you said, this is a cultural aspect of a company, not an initiative, not something that can be taken as a single activity. It needs to be embedded into how you do business. To the point that, for example, in Accenture, we have a commitment by 2025 to be 50% of our workforce, 650,000 people worldwide, 50-50 male-female. So it's and we're very much on track to meeting that number. But when it comes to finance in particular, particularly my experience, Accenture, it's not necessarily a male-dominated finance organization, quite the contrary. It has to do with the shape of the company and of course, how we do business. But definitely there is an aspect in terms of how we foster that inclusiveness across the organization that it needs to be underscored. And it is about the ability to customize the experience of those that work in finance. So not a single individual is the same as the other one. And the way in which you can create that inclusivity across your organization is not by standard HR programs in which the career path is just one. You must also create specific career path for certain people with certain abilities, with certain skills that also helps you to retain them and give them an environment where they can thrive. And that is, for practical, back to the connection between the top leadership and the practicalities, that is something that the ones that are in finance leadership, we need to work and partner with our HR counterparts, with the business, because at some point, in the end, they are the ones receiving what we do, with our shareholders, that this is something that we need to do together. We cannot do, I can do it myself. I have a team of 70 people, 25 sitting here in the region and 45 sitting abroad. When I look at that, I cannot do that if I do it myself. I have to do it with the rest of my team. So that part of the cultural aspect of it is extremely important. And in finance, because again, we deal with the only one thing that has no bias. And that's part of the mentality that everyone needs to have.
So like Hanadi said, it takes a village. It will take a village, the entire village. Before I move on to the next question, because we're talking about also, creating those pathways. Now, earlier you said that, beyond, obviously, we all know that the nationalization programs that exist in Saudi and the UAE are commendable to every degree. But you said that also encouraging the national workforce to go towards a career in the finance and accounting profession. How's that working out and creating an inclusive environment for them there?
Yeah, thank you. I think, the idea of having women in the profession is really, really important. Especially, I'm not talking about just the management accounting department, because that, I think there's really good representation. But I'm talking about the audit and public accountancy profession. And, I'm seeing more and more female, but the problem is they only stay for a couple of years. They don't stay in the profession. They don't see it like, they see this as a stepping stone towards something else. It's only when, I think there's a lot of work that has to be done within the, public accountancy firm to really shift that thinking that this is a profession and it's not just a stepping stone. And for that, there need to be the systemic bias needs to be addressed. The systemic bias of, I've witnessed that, and I'm sure many women who work in this profession witness that. It's still productivity is measured by billable hours. But there's, if you just do that, and then when you leave at 6, people look at you, you won't get anywhere because, no one can stay until 10 and 11 p.m. And that's happened even today. So the systemic bias needs to be addressed. There need to be a lot of understanding of, it's not just like the number of hours. It's what you produce within those hours.
Absolutely.
And then, okay, like we talked about the flexibility. And then one more thing I wanted to mention is the mentoring. The mentoring element is really, really important. And so many female, like they go in this profession, they like it, they love it, but they need like someone to help them, drive that path. They need role model, and they need people who are committed to really, giving them the right advice, not on like in one instance, not in only, not their line manager even, on their performance evaluation quarterly or yearly, but someone who can really have like that perspective, who have done it, and who will be willing to take their hand and walk them through that path.
Excellent. I will actually want to hear more about this, the mentorship programs. Before we take on, by the way, the audiences who are watching us live online, if you have any questions, please do text them to us. We are going to take a few of them later. Mentorship seems to be a huge part of changing, DI, the lack thereof practices in the workplace and the finance and accounting function. Wasim, how are companies, do you advise companies on creating mentorship programs? Have you seen successful ones? Please tell us a bit more about such positive examples in the region.
So we do coach across senior levels, male or female, doesn't matter. We do a lot of mentorship. We embed mentorship cultures and coaching cultures within organizations. One we're doing right now with an Abu Dhabi government entity. Doing tremendously well. I think even ADNOC last month announced winning the PRISM Award for coaching, for building a coaching culture within the organization, which is amazing. Now, having said that, I think that there's a bit of a difference in how we need to mentor women to show up and stand up and woman up, rather than manning up. The problem, the fundamental problem that women are having is that they show up as men. They're trying to compete with the men, and they don't need to. What they need to do is bring their uniqueness to the table, because otherwise it is irrelevant. Then we're comparing them with, can they stay until 11 o'clock? Can they work these long hours? And so on and so forth. That conversation should be irrelevant. That conversation should not be had. Nobody should be working until 11 o'clock. That is a different conversation to be had. But as long as women show up as men or try to compete with men at their own platform, the issue is going to remain the same. So while we are mentoring women into those directions, we're asking them to please bring their uniqueness to the table. Because what they bring to the table, men cannot bring to the table. So why are you showing up as men to begin with? Why are you trying to compete at those levels, at those competencies, at those behaviors that you do not need to engage with, right?
Esther, you definitely did not man up when you showed up with your heart and the way you spoke, so you womaned up. But how are you womaning up other women around you, or not just women, just all genders and nationalities and backgrounds around you? And what do you think mentorship can do to their careers?
So I think the mentorship works, and I think in different ways. So we always try to go the formal route, set up meetings, make sure you've got regular scheduled discussions and reviews, and sometimes that doesn't always work. I think it's important to find the right fit between within the organization of who you talk to and who you think, you're identifying the right person that you would like to, that resonates well with you as an individual. Whether it's male or female. We had, I'll just talk about one of the practices that we had a couple of years ago that I thought was actually really cool and helped change the culture of the organization. So our C-suite folks were told to identify, whether they identified or it was done for them, an employee within the organization that did not look like them. So if you were female, you were supposed to find a male mentee and they were supposed to be of, either different race or different age group. So what that brings is that diversity of thought that you were talking about. And we started seeing the shift, because they're now getting feedback from, we had our chief commercial officer meeting with a young guy who's a techie, who's telling her, what you're trying to do here is not working. You might want to change, some of the things that you're looking at, or you might want to look at, different technology to help your sales force, whatever, right? So whatever directions or whatever conversations were taking place, it was supposed to change the thought process of our leadership team. I think informally, there's a lot we can do as female leaders. I report to a group of women that I love. When I left, I worked for them when I was based in the Middle East. They made my life so much easier and manageable when I was working in Dubai. And when I moved to South Africa in that role, whilst their capacity is not in an operations space, I always reached out back to them to tell them what was going on and the challenges I was going through. And when it got to a point where my tenure in South Africa was over, they tapped on me and said, you know what, now we want you back. And we've created a role for you based on the experience that you have. And from that, we always talk about it with some of my colleagues, that we're happy to come to work. We're happy to work for them because we know they care about us, they care about our lives outside of just work, and that's important.
Thank you, that's beautiful. Mario, are you part of mentorship programs? How strong do you think mentorship works in empowerment? Again, no matter the nationality, the gender, because as you noted, Accenture is very gender equal.
Absolutely. So mentorship has a very strong footprint and a very deep impact into people's careers, not just mine, but everyone's. And probably one thing that we as finance professionals have seen is that our profession has changed significantly in the past 15 to 20 years, right? The surge of technology has changed that, and more that human connect between people is more important. And in that case, mentorship and having someone, not necessarily the same person for a very long time, because mentorship at some point also has to do with the ability to change and getting different perspectives. Again, back to the diversity point. You cannot have diverse points of view with the same profile. You cannot have a different view of what you're doing and your career path if you have always the same mentor. So at some point, mentorship is extremely important to that, but also, taking the step of recognizing when that mentorship needs to change to also have a broader view of how you're doing and how you will do in the future.
Excellent, thank you. I want to take some of the online questions that we have as well. So Andrew Cover from Maya Finance got in touch with us and he sent you a question. The diversity of the workforce is growing as a reputational consideration for companies. Given that qualified individuals don't always reflect the diversity of wider society, how can companies seeking staff with specific skills or qualifications balance their requirements with the need to show diversity of opportunity within the workplace? Nana? No, it's a question to all of you. I think it's an equal playing field here. Everyone gets a chance to speak up.
Thank you. I think it has to be actually reflected not only in the recruitment policy, but in what really happens on the ground. Again, like we always keep talking about the misalignment and some of the disconnect. It's how do you balance the, as Wasim was saying, the qualification, the experience, the leadership skills required to do that job, but also take into consideration that you need to tackle the diversity element. So you need to look at, the candidate pool. You need to have a very diverse candidate pool so you can choose from that candidate pool the best candidate that will fit all the criteria and the diversity, because you cannot ignore everything. I mean, it's very risky when you start like, just because of diversity, I will like, you know, not look at all the other criteria that are very like essential to perform well in that job. So it's a very difficult and hard balancing act, but it's possible. And I find when candidates see the organization as an organization that really promotes diversity and sharing stories, I mean, that's really important. We had to do this because, you know, we were not able to attract female faculty, especially in STEM. We had very low representation, and we had to do something about it. And what we found is we had like 2-3 amazing faculty, and we told them, are you willing to share your stories? Because people, like, when they can relate to stories, they can relate to women making it, like as an assistant dean in the engineering college. Like, it's not many female make it this far, and she's a mom and she has kids. So we started publishing those stories, publishing them in, you know, online, publishing them in you know, like all the written communication, and candidates started relating to female making it. And then we had like a more diverse pool. We had more candidates applying to those positions. And I think, you know, it's baby steps, it takes time, but, you know, they're always like
right
starting
direction.
point, yeah.
Wasim, when we spoke earlier, you had a very structured approach to how this can be processed. I'd love to hear more about that. I think it was a 3-step process that you mentioned.
Yeah, we do use a very specific methodology when we're assessing executive talent for a hire. Let me pull back a little bit. What I understood from the question that was posed was that what if there isn't qualified female talent for that particular role? What if the talent that we're trying to hire is not within the diversity, doesn't fit the diversity buttons that we need to fit, right?
And basically, so it's not a box-ticking process.
Right.
Yeah.
So for us, we have a very neutral approach to this. I mean, it doesn't matter to us whether the person on the other side is a male or a female. What matters to us is whether they can fit our assessment model. They can qualify for the assessment criteria that we what we need to meet the strategic objectives of the organization. The organization normally comes to us with a strategic challenge, and they say, look, here's our problem, here's what we need to solve for, figure it out for us. We need a profile. What does a profile look like? And male, female doesn't even come as a question.
Even
it doesn't,
nationality.
it doesn't.
I've conducted some of the interviews, and some of the people we spoke with said, I missed out on opportunities because the job was posted for a specific nationality and background. So,
Perhaps,
you know,
yeah. So sometimes we hide behind language. We'll say, okay, we need to hide the nationality preference. We'll say we need an Arabic speaker, or we'll need whatever you speaker, right? Anyway, so we're looking at the way that we assess people is based on their technical skill set, whatever technical requirements are needed to actually do the job, right? Second, leadership ability. Can they lead? Have they led before? Do they have the behavioral competencies to lead at that level? Have they led these kinds, or do they have the potential to lead, right? And then the third one, organizational fit, organizational culture. Do they fit within this organization? Do they come from another organization that does things the same way that we do things? Or is it going to be a struggle? Because at the end of the day, that's the sustainability point. If they don't meet the organizational culture, no matter how good of a leader they are, no matter how good of a CFO they are, they're going to end up outside because the organization is going to spit them out. Or they will end up being frustrated with the organization and end up leaving, right? So these three need to be covered very, very well. Now, having said that, I really believe that there is a responsibility towards women to again show up and stand up, right? Because if I I'm off the top of my head, I know 3 female CFOs. I'm a headhunter. Off the top of my head, right? I can name them right now. And the ones that I can name, they're outstanding at what they do. The problem is, if you go on LinkedIn right now and plug in CFO, UAE, or whatever country in this part of the world, how many men do you get? How many women do you get? There you go. That's your answer. As women, we are not standing up enough. We're not womaning up enough. We're not going forward enough. We're not pushing forward enough.
Nada was even saying they're not staying in the career long enough or in the
Yes.
profession to kind of reach the end.
So there is a responsibility also on that diversity piece, whether it's a nationality or it's a gender, that whoever wants to occupy more of a space within an organization, they need to show up for that. They need to show up more often.
Esther, is it a matter of showing up?
I think, so I'm sitting here and I'm listening to what you're saying, and I agree with both of you. But then I also believe that, yes, you do need to show up. You do need to put up your hand. But then I also believe that we also need to pull them up. Because if I'm in a position, in a decision-making position, be it recruiting, be it HR or whatever, and I am not able to identify that person that is not putting their hand up, but I know very well they're very talented, but they probably just don't have that confidence to be able to put up their hand. Or, you know, I looked at the criteria for this CFO position, and it asks for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 7, you know, I exceed. But I'm not so sure it's the same profile, so I'm probably not going to, because we do see that sometimes, where females tend to question themselves more. So if we do not do our part, and that's where I say we have to be deliberate sometimes, to dig deeper, to identify those folks, to identify those gems, because those gems exist within the businesses, and give them the opportunity, then you'll continue seeing those 3 CFOs sitting in LinkedIn, and that number won't go up. We have to be deliberate about it.
Thank you. Mario, how do you strike the balance between diversity and qualification? Make sure you have the right workforce, but that they're actually, you know, diverse.
So I'm going to reflect on something that Neda said. That, yes, of course, whatever you don't measure, it doesn't happen, right? Now, striking the right balance, that is probably a very difficult question, because in the end, what you need is the talent of the people to do their daily jobs and think beyond their jobs on day-to-day. Now, in finance in particular, again, being by default, you sort of 65% of women saying that it's an equitable career, this is where there needs to be a certain aspect of being deliberate about it, and a very specific work towards how you design the career path for the people that work with you. And in that deliberate aspect, you need to put certain focuses in certain groups to make sure that you have that level of diversity. And probably something that I told some of the people in my team, when I first came in the Middle East, there were very few female in the group, very few. And I took a picture, and it was all male. Me coming from Argentina, where the majority of the finance teams are female, it was a shock to me. So that is something that I took personally to change, because otherwise I would be missing what Basim was saying, half the brain. And that balance is something that I needed to be deliberate about.
Thank you. We have a few questions from the online audiences, so we'll just go through them quickly and then we can wrap up. And by the way, the audience here as well, if you have any questions, you will get a chance to ask it. So Javadi Rao asks, how do we measure the perception of the lower level employees in an organization that DEI processes are actually in place and being practiced? So we're looking at it from a perception kind of view, and then how do you track perception? Because, you know, Mario was also saying you need to kind of quantify it, have a kind of metrics in place. So how can you do that?
It actually crossed my mind while everyone was talking that it's actually could be dangerous practice when you don't walk the talk. So, you know, organization that say, oh, we have like DEI practices and this is what we're doing, and then like people like at the lower level, they don't really feel it. it becomes so frustrating. It even has like a worse effect than not having any DEI at all, probably. And these are the people who will be frustrated, they will leave, and an organization will lose talent. So they have to feel it, and they have to be included in those discussions. It can't be like, we have like one slogan or one training, and that's enough. They have to be part of the solution, in my opinion.
Okay.
I think when we're measuring organizational culture in general, right? Organizational culture is about the collective programming within an organization. So how do we all use that software of our minds to work together in very particular ways? What is accepted, what is not accepted, what are our perspectives? And when we do that, we actually break up the organization into different relevant groups. By function, by level, by gender if we want to, by age group, by pay scale, whatever we want to. So we can have any perspective that we need to have. And so with that, when we're trying to solve for DE&I, we're trying to solve for very particular positioning on the organizational culture dimension. We're looking for an organization that needs to be more people-oriented, have a more open system, be more professional rather than local, which means that they're actually committed to doing the right things the way that things should be done, and so on and so forth, right? So there are very particular positions, and if we find that the organization is sitting on the opposite end of that spectrum, then there is a gap that needs to be covered, and then we need to move them. So if we are measuring and we're looking at the top level of the organization, top level of organization is saying that we are like that, that is their perspective, but the bottom end of the organization or the middle end or the different functions are saying different things. So we need to measure these perspectives against each other and try to reconcile why are these people seeing the same organization differently, right?
Thank you, Wasim. Thank you, Nanda, by the way. Some good suggestions. Esther, how do you make sure that you don't kind of overrun and you start talking about slogans and then effectively, as Wasim said, half of your organization doesn't feel the same way, or you open up Pandora's box through the research?
Right. So I think there's a couple of efforts that you can take. We've seen, for instance, at UPS, we started what we call the business resource groups, and those all fall under our Chief Diversity and Inclusion, Equity and Inclusion Office's office. And we have about 260 chapters around the globe, and they vary based on different groups of folks that have come together to address or to, because they think they've got something in common. So it could be women's leadership, we've got women's leadership development groups, we've got millennial BRGs, we've got the LGBTQ BRGs, and they all feed back information to Charlene on areas or concerns that they have, but they also engage in different types of activities amongst themselves. When I was in South Africa, I had an employee equity group, and this group was made up of folks from, just diverse, different ranges within the organization, from operations to your admin staff and a few members of the leadership team. And we sat down on a monthly basis and discussed the concerns that we were getting from that were going on, or whatever issues that employees were having, or what we wanted to do or implement. If it was a policy change we wanted to implement, and would get feedback from everybody, so that whatever decision we're trying to make as an organization, we could always say we've engaged with different members of the organization, so different levels of the organization, before actually implementing it. In some cases, they would come back and tell us, no, actually, we don't think that's the right direction. That's not going to work. It's all going to work with this with this population within the group, because these are the concerns that they have, and they can't be able to, from a timing perspective, it doesn't work for them. But we made sure we got input from different groups of people or different departments within the organization and different levels within the organization.
Thank you. Mario, do you have a kind of DEI metrics in place, and how often do you monitor on an annual basis? Like, how do you keep your finger on the pulse with that?
So we do have, definitely, mainly two large KPIs within what we call the 360 client value proposition. But we look at, as I said, the percentage of the workforce between male and female, and the number or the percentage of the managing directors, which is the top part of our pyramid, which is the leadership of the company. Those are the two key metrics. And then that cascades into a number of KPIs across the organization. Individually in finance, we do have certain aspects of how we deal with our teams that are more exacerbated than in some other groups because of the talent pool availability.
Thank you. Do we have any audience questions here? Okay, great. Can we pass them the microphone, please? Here you go. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and it's been a great session hearing from all the great leaders here. I think this room is almost highly diversified, right? Coming to the point now, we're talking about gender equality. I'm also talking about a bigger issue. Are we talking about even transgenders being diversifiedly included into the so-called framework? This is one thing. Second is the opening up. That's a great thing we are talking about today, as Mr. Wazim was talking. There are some unique aspects where women can contribute as compared to the men. Is there any policies, organizations are really recognizing it? Is there any framework legally that is recognizing it, wherein they have to be given a specific percentage of quota system so that they can also be represented deliberately, as Ms. Esther was telling? Thanks.
Quota system, I mean, it kind of gives you boxes to tick. Okay, it reminds me a little bit of how we touched on this earlier, striking the right balance. But yeah, is there a framework, Nada?
Yeah, I think there's a very big danger when we talk about the quota system, and there are so many failed initiatives because of quota system. It's not that just a number, it's really like what you do and the strong belief of the organization to be diverse and inclusive. The quota system, in my opinion, like having gone through this many, many times, it does not work. In fact, it puts the people who are taking that quota, like be it national, be it female, be it whomever, like you want, whatever quota you decide, it puts them in a box, and then it creates that culture of these are the group of people who are here because of the quota and not because of their qualification. And most often they have the qualification, they have everything that it takes. But people see it this way. There's this big perception that leads to a lot of frustration. And then all those initiatives fail. It's only when you recognize the talent for the talent and you embed them in the organization that you can succeed.
Wasim, you shook your head. Are you not a fan of the quota system?
Not at all. I think it's, honestly, I think it's in and within itself, any quota system is discriminating by nature, right? So as soon as you put a quota system, it's good to start off with, to say, look, we need to hit certain metrics, right? It's when you're in a space where there's nothing there, you need to say, okay, what's the next thing that we can do? So fine to put some measurements around it, but once you, why is it 30%? Why is it not a 90%? Why is it not 50? What is needed by the organization, and why are we actually having to choose between this or that? It doesn't make sense, right? So as soon as you say 30%, we tick that box, that means we can stop now. Let's go back to operating normally. So it doesn't make sense, right?
Esther, how do you view quotas? Sorry?
So I've got mixed feelings about it. So I got a crash course on quota systems when I went to South Africa. So they have, it's part of the legal framework. If you want to compete in business, they've got a program called the Black Empowerment Program. So it's a triple B, and you get rated and scored as a business based on the diversity within your board leadership and your employee base. And it was put there for a very specific reason because of the country coming out of apartheid. Good, right? So it's great because then you're able to bring in folks that probably would not have had a place in the table, would not have had opportunities before. It works in certain levels, in that you're creating opportunities, training, and all that, for employees. Where it doesn't work is when people take advantage of the system, right? So I know, because you're looking for my type of profile, I will demand X, whereas my performance may not necessarily be at that level. And I learned the hard way. I mean, I talked about the diverse. I went through a couple of iterations. I was like, oh, but she looks like she showed up well. She looks good. She ticks. In fact, when I rate her, she's at 112, right? So she's above the charts. And she shows up, and she expects me to treat her like the princess that she's considered, right? Or he's considered. And so you end up making a decision because of the fact that they ticked the boxes and were actually going to help your scorecard. Whereas in reality, if we had just dug a little deeper, would have found out that maybe that candidate actually lacked either the business acumen or the EQ that's needed for them to be part of the leadership team, or whatever the reasons, whatever challenges it is that we went through. So I see it working in certain spaces, but it can be very, very dangerous when you're making decisions solely on the quota system.
Thank you, Esther. Mario, do you also feel that it's a tread carefully kind of pathway?
It definitely needs to be treated carefully. I do believe that quotas at some point and merit need to go hand in hand. Because when you want to build a diverse organization, you definitely need to at least have a target to tend towards that. Then, of course, you may exceed, be above, beyond, but it's about working hand in hand. You cannot make a decision solely on ticking a box, because again, being a CFO, the first thing that you're doing is you're just building up cost and dropping your profitability without the effectiveness of that. Sorry for being so financially about that. But in the end, merit will always be, and the fit of the skills and your willingness to step up is going to be driving it. Quotas are probably more about the trend and the long term rather than actually ticking a box.
Nada, I feel you.
I remembered like a good example of how you can reimagine quotas. Again, like having gone through how quotas can be really difficult. So, you can reimagine quota by looking at what is the target community you're trying to like attract to a certain field. And I'll give an example. We had like very low representation of Emirati in the research space. So one way to look at it is we go and force faculty to hire Emirati researcher in their groups. And we knew it won't work. It definitely won't work. Neither the culture will accept it, nor the way recruitment happens for those particular positions will work. So we decided to create a program that will attract Emiratis to the research space by having faculty mentoring them. So they don't have to hire them, but they can be part of this program. They can see them grow. And we give them like space to develop over 2 years. Even financially, we had to create incentives so it doesn't come from their budget, it comes from more a central budget, but then, once they are developed, they take them in their specific group. And it really worked. I mean, we were able to attract like hundreds of young Emirati to the research space, which was really underrepresented. And we didn't create that friction that would happen when you have to do it.
So the only way to have to apply quota is if you have a plan of how to nurture this talent. I love it. Okay, it's been a great session. I think what we've attempted to do today is create a dialogue, and your views have been seriously fundamental, and your expertise has been integral to kind of bringing this to life. The hope is that in January, the full report will be out, and we will get even more in-depth knowledge of the status of DEI practices and perception towards DEI practices in the region. We know there's much work to be done. Yes, we live in very good times, and I know we feel blessed on many levels. Esther, you mentioned that, 7% is a very small number, but yet when we could look at it 20 years ago, this was not the case. Not this many women would have been in this room, and the future is going to be even brighter. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for being so generous with your thoughts and views on this. And we hope that this, creates a little dynamic shift in your minds today and in the minds of those you speak with going forward. Thank you so much.